Greetings, Woodsians and School of Lifers. So this week's business analysis webinar is just going to talk about management in general. Various things I've learned. Some of them will talk about extensions of things I talked about last week. So I come to all this analysis stuff from a long career doing all kinds of simulation in many industries, many different applications and architectures. Just so you know, these presentations are prepared in the reveal.js framework, which you can actually learn something about at the website slides.com. And there are links embedded in the slides. So they'll always go to more information. I sprinkled them in these liberally. So last week I talked about different practice areas and certifications. One thing we know is that Six Sigma's kind of on the way out. It's been out for a long time. It was very big in GE and Motorola before it. It's gone because it's incomplete and it's very heavy. So in reality, the whole industry and humans working together in general have really been trying to solve increasingly complex versions of the same problem more or less since the beginning of time. This book I reference here, I talk about it often, facts of and fallacies of software engineering, talks about how nothing has really changed in software engineering in 60 years. It's just new things turn out to be incremental. Nothing is the killer app or the final solution. And this is probably happening with the Agile right now. Everyone thought it was the greatest thing ever, and they're finding its limits. So I like to refer to one of the creators of the Agile Manifesto's presentation he gave in 2015 saying Agile is dead. And what he really said is it doesn't mean that the problems Agile was actually at root trying to solve aren't real problems, or that some of the methodologies aren't worthwhile. It's that you have to understand the underlying is the problem it's trying to solve, and that is really in the end about getting people to talk to each other. And there are limits to this, which is what the Tower of Babel story. It's one aspect of it. There are other aspects. As I learned when I've shared this, for example, that story talks about making bricks out of clay and also stone. And it's really, I don't remember the entire gist of it, but clay is less permanent, so there's a lot going on in that story. But one is certainly about organizational limits and communication. So somebody else said in the presentation I link here that Agile is humanity's way of working together. And I think it's just the latest iteration of trying to manage more complexity at a greater scale. And nothing really makes that happen like large systems, processes, and most of those we do in this day and age are really about software. One artistic way that people have addressed this idea is the Russia's Hemispheres album. It was like their, I think, sixth studio album, and the entire A side is about Apollo and Dionysus and uniting of the heart and mind. So a lot of people have been thinking about these things. And whatever formal methodologies you use, for example, if you look on Wikipedia and look at a lot of them, they all include a section on criticism. So everything, a specific methodology has a problem, but at root, they're all trying to get people to talk to each other. So the framework that I've come up with and I talk about endlessly in these webinars is really not just about how to solve problems. It's about how to get team members to work together and customers to communicate. So it's about the meta, it's about the process as well as the product. So it's about the engagement as much as the solution. And there are all kinds of feedback to do this. What you're trying to do is build understanding and alignment across all parties, all participants, and all scopes and scales. One thing that was suggested in the last batch of material I reviewed that inspired this presentation was to consider putting retrospectives into the backlog to make sure they happen. And another thing they admonish us to do is not maintain a hidden backlog. It's always better to be upfront and transparent. So when you work through the phases forwards, it makes you actually do analysis before you try to solve the problem. So I've talked in the past about approaches to solving problems, and sometimes you go in with the hammer looking to bang nails, but sometimes you go in with a more flexible, open approach, and even if you're just looking to bang nails with the hammer, which is to say, you know what class of solution you want to apply, you really want to do the analysis first. And when you iterate forward, it forces you to do that. And when you iterate backwards, it really helps you be thorough and understand all the uses and root causes. So it is designed to make you treat the underlying root causes and not the symptoms. So you can think about doing the work on 3 different levels. You can think about how you do the work within the team through each phase and with the customer, and also everything I've talked about as far as the solution itself and developing that. So you can think of the framework as operating on 3 levels: team, customer, and solution. You're always iterating, always communicating, and always hopefully improving and getting things right. All right. Humans like to be safe. All animals want to be safe. And they tend to respond to more things as threats. They're programmed to do that. It's kind of built into our biology. And we spend a lot of time overcoming that in our lives in different ways. And one of the things we want to do organizationally is create safety so people aren't worried about seeing things as threats. So that's what safety is in security. People have done all kinds of research on teams. In one particular research study, compared different kinds of cultures and said that the commitment cultures tend to be best. And they were better than star cultures. I think it's good to have stars, but you can't necessarily have a whole teams of stars because they can be prima donnas and someone, and you need all the glue and people to be kind of mellow and be able to work together. And there are many different historical situations where that's proven to be true. So famous swing era band leaders wouldn't always go for the best players to travel with their bands. They would get more mellow and reliable players. That said, you have a few really great stars and individuals, but they tend to bounce around. And we all know of athletes that that's true for. And one other important observation is sometimes you succeed by accident, but it's better if you succeed on purpose. So by creating a good environment and by being thorough, you have a better chance to succeed on purpose. And this article here, that a link on the bottom, has to do with a project I managed and inspired in college that resulted in kind of a fun win. I learned a lot from that, and as I go through life, I learn more. Interesting article. So here's a link to a presentation that says that only about 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 agile transformations actually work. And that is judged by saying they're still using the methods effectively after a year. And that means the payoff of doing that effort or making that change has to be almost 7-1 to break even. And that's really a high bar to get over, right? So one thing they talk about is getting people engaged. For everyone you get engaged in, get buy-in, you remove a resistor and get one more marginal supporter. And then the question comes up, how do we keep people engaged? And it's really, I say this over and over again, it's about communication. And there are some other things involved, but that's mostly it. So you want to, there are a lot of ways of understanding people, their personalities, communicating with them based on the way they like to learn things. Here are a few links to different ways to do that. They're all links. One thing that might be good is actually running Scrum on your relationships. So that means doing occasional short and long-term planning and checking in every day in some short way and periodically reviewing how things went. And communicate in whatever way, and this references the Borg model, right, which is visual, audio, reading, and kinesthetic, which is physically doing. A picture is worth 1,000 words. I love making pictures and diagrams, and animation is 1,000 pictures. I do some of those too. They're harder, but they really make things pop if you can put them together. So everybody comes from a different place. They all have experiences. There are certain surface kinds of diversity in I think those are overemphasized. They're not unimportant, but for the purposes of solving problems, you really want what people know and what they can do. You want to leverage that aspect of the way people are different to get them to work together and really apply a lot of power to solutions. And people have ideas in their head based on their own experience of what they want, and they tend to think about what they want in terms of what they already know. So I know as I was learning about Agile and Scrum starting about 6, 7, 8 years ago, I had limited understandings of them based on specific things that I had experienced. And it took a while to get under those surface understandings to really understand what they were about. And that's a long process. It requires communication to do that. And we as analysts, business analysts in particular, we are learning and translating machines. So the more we know about people and their potential biases and experiences, more readily we can be prepared to dig into understanding them. And I always say, you don't know what you don't know till you know what you don't know, you know? So I always thought that was cute. That said, there is something, as much as you want to get everybody talking to each other, at some point, somebody has to break the ties. And it might be a senior manager, it might be the customer. The more you have those expectations and understandings built in ahead of time, the better off everybody is going to be. So there's a lot we can say about testing. Individual tests might not cover all cases, that's why there are one-to-many and many-to-one links throughout requirements traceability, so you can do individual tests, unit tests, automated tests, functional tests, tests of components, groups of components, subsystems in the entire system. So there are a lot of ways to hit these in many different ways. So we can, people can be concerned about different skills. Some people can be in charge of features, others components, others products, others the glue in integration between them. So that's kind of like epic story and task, but that's a little bit different of a thing. And Jane Jacobs, who was a famous sociologist who studied cities, she lived for a long time, died 10 or 15 years ago, I think. She differentiated between development, which is doing more different things, and growth, which is doing more of the same thing. So both are important. That's scope and scale, right? So every situation where things didn't go great is because there was poor team dynamics and poor communication. And when there was good team dynamics and communication and shared understandings, things tended to go way better. Doesn't mean things were always perfect one way or the other, but the trend is clear. So one thing that's a fairly classic analysis is the important versus urgent analysis. You differentiate important things and unimportant things in a matrix against urgent versus not urgent. And you want to segregate tasks that you have and concentrate on doing the urgent, important things and try to stay away from doing the not urgent, not important things. They can be very easy to do, very rote. You can feel like you got a lot of items ticked off your to-do list, but they aren't really super productive. What we are is maximizing important things in which way can be replaced, things that can be automated. This is especially true in this area of creeping AI or era of it. And let's say something about economic calculations. There are a bunch of things to be aware of. This is more a project management thing than a business analysis thing, but BAs and all kinds of analysts really ought to be able to understand these things. So there are different kinds of costs, which are capital, fixed, and variable. And fixed and variable are kind of operating costs. And you are dealing with the iron triangle trade-offs of time, scope, and quality. and you're trading off a number of different things, resources, and non-functional requirements, which are different qualities of the solution and the process. But in the end, you'll ultimately optimize on money, at least for-profit organizations, but even nonprofit organizations need to optimize on money enough to make sure they don't go completely broke. It's very important to understand time value of money calculations. There's a link to the standard article on in Wikipedia that describes the basic family of calculations. Usually you're talking about net present value and future value of different kinds of cash flows and interest. I also linked to my college textbook. So I took a course in this in 1981 because everybody in my family was in economics, and it's been a very good knowledge to have in my back pocket throughout my career in my life. It's a very famous book. I had in only probably the second edition of it. I still have it. ROI is a big thing people talk about, and the thing is, people use it to justify projects, but once that mechanism gets rolling, they tend not to think about it too much. And the project either works or doesn't work. Every now and then they'll jump out when things go really off the rails. Especially within large organizations, management can be pretty loose on these things and pretty diffuse. So let's talk about two contrasting examples. One is that I worked in a steel mill for a while, and there was this young manager. He was a really sweet guy, meant super well, but he really, he had to sign off on things, but I could see that he didn't really have a really close idea of where the money was going and how much maybe it was happening in the background. But he had to approve things and just sign things all the time. And I've also heard of grocery stores that run snack bars, and they keep their own books based on the retail cost of goods that they buy from the store, so they can keep track of that standalone activity to see if it's actually making money and worthwhile to keep running. So management can always be as tight and focused as you want it to be. And it's always better if it is. One famous observation is that the quality manager management doesn't matter so much when the situation is super positive. Nobody can screw up, or super negative, nobody can succeed. Sometimes those things happen. It makes the difference in more middling situations. Entrepreneurship is about taking risks under conditions of uncertainty. And we've probably talked about estimation The more prior history, the more previous analogs you have to compare your current situation to, generally the better off you're going to be. And the more uncertainty there is, well, that's when the entrepreneur has to jump in and say, go, no go, or figure out how to proceed. And this particular analysis here came from one of the presentations that says Fortune 500 companies used to stick around for a long time, and now companies come and go very quickly, and the speed at which they turn over is getting faster all the time. I remember when I was young, I'd read the annual Fortune 500. And I remember in the mid to late 70s, Pullman, which made railroad cars, they went off the Fortune 500 industrials at number 120 because they were either reclassified or just stopped existing. And that kind of thing is way more prevalent now. It was kind of rare, and now things come and go all the time. If you remember the Super Bowl commercials during the tech boom around the turn of the century, and there were all these bizarre companies that showed up and then made a big splash like BlackRock, and I still have no idea what that company did. And now they're just gone with the wind. So because everybody, things happen faster, everybody needs to learn faster and be more adaptable and flexible. So one thing you want to be able to do is really know your material. You want to be what I call wallowing in it. And when you really understand your material deeply, you work a lot more quickly and effectively. I once wrote a 50,000 line system by myself. In 3 months, I was at home the first month, working 40-hour weeks getting set up, and then 2 months in the field working 80-hour weeks, 7 days a week. And this was literally 8 or 9 weeks flat out. But it was some of the best work I ever did. And another thing that motivated me was I couldn't go home till I was done. But at that stage of my career, I was used to hanging out at Waffle House and chain smoking Marlboros and just going for it. So there are some things about expert, and expert is somebody who's totally wallowing in the material, who's put in the hours, and who knows enough about what's going on to be worried. So you know where the edges are, you know where the safety margins are, and the limits of design and so on. It's also somebody who can see the slightest variations that are unexpected and maybe when they aren't even looking for them. It's just being in tune with your environment and your work. So if you want to keep people engaged and get them engaged. It's all about communication, sharing, transparency. One of the ways my managers did this at my first engineering job was they would pass around a folder with all that week's magazines and technical papers and patents and other things and things they pull out of their files. They wanted, particularly me as a new engineer, to know based on questions I'd asked and things that had come up in meetings and problem solving sessions of various kinds. So the more communications tools you can use to get people to talk to each other, the better. Pay for website and magazine subscriptions, professional memberships, certifications, and so on. Those costs are trivial by comparison. They build a lot of buy-in and engagement, and they're way cheaper than getting new people and training them. Pay people to learn, take courses, write up things, do research, and so on. And supporting internal and external communities practice is good. This lunch and learn we're doing is an external community practice. I've done brown bags at places I've worked and gotten many people to share things they learned. It's always a good thing. All right, let us contrast two different kinds of organizations in light of everything we've discussed so far. So, some organizations and some professions tend to be flexible and creative and involve a lot of research and buy-in and engagement, and some don't. So in some cases, let's talk about the ones that don't first. If you're in a factory working on an assembly line, you have to deal with what's in front of you. Same thing if you're, say, working at McDonald's, there's stuff to do. It comes in, you have to do X, and it goes out. And it's really hard to have a lot of leeway in how you attack problems. And so the way that you build engagement in those situations is necessarily different than the way a creative team with more leeway might do things. So some things are unavoidable. And the way Henry Ford solved the problem of turnover on his first assembly lines, it was terrible because the work was so boring and repetitive. He had to continuously raise wages until people stopped quitting all the time after short periods of time. And it finally, once it got wages up to about double the prevailing wage, then the turnover finally got down to a reasonable level. So everyone has a price, right? So as engineers, analysts, and so on, advertisers, creatives, arts, and you can say for the arts there's a difference. So in general, they're quite flexible, but there are other aspects of that kind of work that can be repetitive. So once I learned how to do furnace control systems, and there was a certain amount of creativity involved in each one, overall the process got pretty dull. And you can imagine a band, there's one process of creating all the music in a stage show, and then there's another process of going on the road, setting up, performing the same set over and over for maybe 150 tour dates, and then tearing it down and going to the next city. So there are always elements of both. The more novel things are, the more interesting they can be. You can't always get flexibility and creativity. And there are some in between kinds of things. And there are some examples. So you have to keep people engaged and incentivized and supported and so on based on the kind of job that they're doing. You can imagine that in the medical profession, particularly in nursing or home health care or something that might not be super high skilled, the challenge people get out of it is the interpersonal communication and the feeling that you're helping individuals. So you always have to find the win in every situation. And you have to, if you're managing or being in charge of an environment, you have to help people learn to find those wins and what works for them. So here was an interesting presentation. The guy talked for an hour, but mostly said there are two aspects of organizations. There's kind of the technical processes in the internal communications and so on. And then there's the isness and the purpose of the organization. In the higher level stuff, the consciousness or the brain or the heart is more important than the muscle and the skill and the detail. So one thing I would add to that is that organizations sometimes have to be transactional. If the economy takes a downturn, you might have to let people go. And people talk about demanding loyalty from employees, but then they turn around and they aren't loyal to employees. So there are examples going both ways. And sometimes organizations should be try to inspire as much loyalty as possible or create the best possible situation while people are in it, with the understanding that things might not be permanent or other necessities may come to bear. And one way organizations do that is by having more contract employees and fewer permanent, but that's kind of another discussion. So this guy had an interesting talk. I think he split time with another guy, so they each talked for a half hour. The most memorable thing of this guy's profession or presentation was he talked about the process of becoming a leader, and it's fairly standard. It's really about doing and then leading, and then teaching others. So it's becoming an expert and then giving back and having a control and inspiration over a wider scope and scale of people over time. One thing Jordan Peterson and others talk about, I learned it from him, but it's a fairly standard part of the psychological literature, is the right amount of positive to negative interactions in any relationship is about 5-1. So you don't want too much positive because things aren't challenging enough, and you don't want too much negative because there isn't enough incentive and there's too much frustration. So you want to balance those things. It comes up in a lot of situations all throughout life. And what you want to do with employees and organizations is continually grow and learn at a level at which people can absorb things, and so they can succeed given the reasonable amount of effort. One thing they shared is the COIN acronym. So there's context and observation and impact and next steps. So there's a situation, you see something, you figure out what it means, and you figure out what to do about it. And that's a way of handling certain interpersonal things. But on the other hand, it's also just another form of like plan, do, check, act, or OODA loop, or so on. That is kind of the scientific method, just stating in another way. And as always, it's all about communications. And we are done for today. Do you have any thoughts or questions?
I don't have any today, but good overview.
My voice is totally trashed today, but
You're right on the Agile thing, because on Agile, we were doing Agile at the place I was working at last, and I was the person that would go around and make sure that all the different tasks that everyone picked up would connect with each other.
Right.
And that's not accounted for in the Agile process.
That's true.
So when they got rid of me, they thought, well, you're not fitting in here. And they got rid of me. The whole project fell apart because they were pointing fingers at each other and everything, like, your microservice didn't handle my API. And, it's because the API was in mixed case and the other one was in, those type things I handled. And that's not within Agile, but your stuff seems to compensate for that.
Yep, that's what this is all about. So you want to, and remember about 2 weeks ago, I did the thing with the hierarchy of the design kind of melded in with the traceability across pages. And you're the person that really talked about the glue that links all these items together, whether it's in the logical hierarchy or the time-wise or progress hierarchy. And one of the things I plan to talk about next week, as I think I mentioned to you last night, is there are other artifacts that really help maintain that. I'm trying to do everything by user stories, and there's a great picture I have of that. Doesn't give you enough information. It's only a view from one direction. So you need these other artifacts to see how things look from different directions. And that's very important. So I'll cover that next week. It'll be some new material for me in the framework.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right, awesome.
Chad, I would say your team wasn't really following Agile if they were, because a big part of it is to have that stand-up meeting where they informally, the stand-up meeting, it's a quick review, 5 minutes, by
Yeah,
cliche, and then it's supposed to spawn. It's not supposed to be 5 minutes so you can run away back to your cubicle. It's supposed to be 5 minutes that kicks off like a 5-minute discovery of the
you're
issue.
right.
Yeah.
But the developers weren't dedicated to that particular thing. And that was the problem, because they would not get the information they need for the task and say, oh, I can do that later. And they wouldn't work on it immediately. And when you discuss something, if you do not go back and work on it, you're going to forget parts or forget what it's supposed to be. And so I was the one that kept the glue together. I kept communicating. Like, they worked for a week and couldn't get the thing to work. I brought them in a meeting, 5 minutes, we fixed it.
Exactly.
I didn't know their code on either one, but I told them to go to a particular place, within their code, and they showed it, and I could see. And then all of a sudden they say, well, every time I'll just uppercase when it comes in. And I said, no, in the future, we may want the mixed case, and that'll make the future project more horrendous, that type thing. But yeah,
I'd say they were using you as a crutch instead of doing it.
Doing
the right thing.
They found out that after they decided I wasn't needed.
Yeah.
But they canceled the project because it was getting too bad.
That happens, unfortunately. I know one of the most fun aspects of my second engineering job was at Westinghouse doing nuclear power plant simulators. And I go talk to the other modelers who did the fluid and usually fluid models, but sometimes the electrical models or the handler models for valves and pumps and standard equipment, and we would negotiate the interfaces. So it was an understood and accepted part of our job is to make sure all the systems talk to each other. Now, some of that discipline was imposed from above, because by the time we got the models, they were all, the scope and interfaces were already defined. So they showed us the P&Is, which is processing instrumentation diagrams. So we know where the pipes and tanks were, and we knew where the physical interfaces were. And then we had to figure out what information needed to be exchanged to make them all match. So that really happens at a lot of levels, and that's where you need those structures to impose that external discipline and make people aware of it.
Yeah.
Okay, groovy, gentlemen. Thank you as always.